Hey, welcome everybody. They asked me to do a little introduction to lobster boat racing, which has been around the coast for a long, long, long time. This is Maine's answer to NASCAR. And you give a guy anything with power, and there's another guy out there with the same thing, they're going to find a way to race it. I don't care if it's a horse, a bicycle, or whatever. You know, they're going to see who's got the best thing. So, and over the years, lobster boat racing has progressed from just run-of-the-mill races in a number of harbors up and down the coast. And, the louder the better. And then close racing is what draws the people to it. And early on, they started racing friendship sloops. And there's a story in Jonesport that this started around 1900. And Willis Beale, who now says that his brother, Robert, actually has a cup from one of the first races in friendship sloops that we would have to consider probably the first organized lobster boat race. Over the years, these races have progressed, and there's been a number of them here and there, but they weren't really organized until you got to the 1960s, 63, 64, when Bert Frost, who was the son of Will Frost, who we termed the founder of the Maine lobster boat, actually organized the races in Jonesport. And I don't think there were very many actual races inside that race that day. There may have been 6, because they broke them up into, outboard classes. And at that time, the only thing that was available were gasoline. So, the friendship sloops basically gave way to the make and break engine. And then that engine gave way to the gasoline engine. And if you look at the technology, that really didn't grow that much until you got into the 1970s, 1980s, when the engine started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then the diesels came in, and they pretty much have eclipsed the gasoline boats. Today, back in the old days, it was all gasoline, say in the 60s and 70s. And then in the 80s, you started seeing sprinklings of the diesel engines coming in. And then it's pretty much all diesels today. I think we have 5 gasoline classes, and sometimes we only have 1 boat in each class. Now, sometimes it's actually the battle of the day, though. And it's always been said, if you put the gasoline boats, or what we call the funny boats, the boats that really do not haul, and pitted them against, had them go one way down the reach and a real lobster boat go the other way, everybody would go and watch the funny boats go, because you want to see who's going to make it to the end, because sometimes they don't get very far down the course before something comes unglued. And with these engines and the sizes increasing, you got bigger boats, because these boats pretty much through the 20s, 30s, up into the 60s, 70s, they averaged around 35 feet in length. But with the big engines coming and these fishermen wanting to go out further, the boats got bigger, the engines got bigger. Today, the average boat is probably 40 to 45 feet in length. We've got some up to close to 50. And I think the biggest engine we've seen in diesel class is probably around 1,600 horsepower. Now, in the gasoline classes, there's been some huge engines, some that are supposedly pushing out close to 2,000 to 2,500 horsepower. And they burn not just regular fuel that you go and get at the gas pump. They'll get aviation fuel. They'll do all kinds of funny things. Now, some of it legal, some of it not, which, just goes with the game. Like I said, the first races were organized in Moosabec, which is between Jonesport and Beals Island. And then others followed. I think Winter Harbor came next. They raced in Portland. And then now we have 11 races. And some of the major happenings, as you can see on the screen, in 2001, we were racing in conditions that probably weren't the best idea, as this is Wild Wild West, powered with a great big gasoline motor. And the boat to her left is Terminator, and that was Jimmy Clemens's boat. He had a NASCAR engine in that. I think it was around 900 horsepower. And both boats were difficult to handle. And they were supposed to jog up the cost, but testosterone sort of took over. And this boat actually rolls completely over. And we were fortunate because some of us thought that the top had been stick built, which meant that it wasn't a molded top. But whoever built the top built a tough top. And only thing that happened were the windows blew out of her. Of course, she sank. And we had one person with a broken arm. We were very, very lucky that day. The Coast Guard was a little upset and demanded the races be stopped, which actually got some of the fishermen fired up that said, you know, real lobster boats wouldn't have had a problem in this, and which is probably true. So then we had so we've got basically 5 classes in the gasoline. We've got a number of diesel classes. The gasoline record's around 72.8 miles an hour, and the diesel is around 60.6 miles an hour, which could be broken anytime. By Wild Wild West holds that. The gasoline is held by Galen Alley in Foolish Pleasure, which was done back in, I think, 2015. Now, the fastest woman, which was brought up to me because somebody's doing a book or has done a book on lobster boats. And it actually is Andrea Holland. And she did it on board All Set. And her speed is supposedly at about 52 miles an hour. And I need to go back and check records on that. Now, one of the interesting things is, why did boat builders want to race? Well, they wanted to race because what was coming in at the time that some of these boat builders were starting their business, and that was fiberglass. You know, up till the 1960s, make that the late 70s, glass was not that big a deal. There was some glass boats out there. There was Repco's. There was Weber's Cove. Weber's Cove, of course, being the first one. That 34 was designed by the United States Navy, which, you know, kind of explains some of the stuff, how it looks. But, you know, so what's the best way to market your boat? Well, you put it in a race and you get the fastest boat, you can sell a lot of boats the next day, kind of like what NASCAR was, you know, says, you know, win on Sunday, sold on Monday. And a lot of these guys really did well. And those guys would be the Holland, it would be Duffy, and it would be the Young brothers. They did very, very well marketing their boats by racing. The bottom line today in racing is, how much money do you have? Because it is expensive. Now, some of these boats are strictly really lobster boats. They'll do a little playing, they'll push the motor a little bit, but it's not that expensive. You can get expensive if you start running into propellers, you start adding on to some of the things on the engine. You could change turbos, you could change injectors and stuff like that. But, you know, the real money is if you're going to win, say, in the gas classes, you're going to spend a lot of money in a strict out gasoline motor, say from Chief Engines, which is what Glenn Holland decided to do. He went down to Florida and bought a monster engine back in the late 1990s and set the record in Searsport one year. So our venues, we start on the 17th of June this year, and I'll give you the whole schedule at the end of the talk today. And we start in Booth Bay, which has been going, well, I remember going to Booth Bay in April as actually the start of the lobster boat race season. And at times we were sitting on a barge and it was snowing. And the woman that ran the races, Frederica Luke, is if you weren't lined up when you were supposed to be, it was too bad. The race was started and you didn't get your money back. She would also run all of the races within an hour, which is sometimes it was really good, especially if it was cold and not a nice day. And there was a number of days it wasn't nice out there. We have a new race in Rockland that started probably maybe 10 years ago. And then we go to Bass Harbor, which is a relatively new race. Then we go to Jonesport and do Moosabec Reach. Then we come to Stonington, which used to be the Daytona race of the lobster boat season, but I think they've kind of been usurped by Winter Harbor now. After Stonington, we go to Friendship. Then we come to Harpswell. Then we go to Winter Harbor. And after Winter Harbor, the next day is Pemaquid. And Pemaquid is the only non-points race that we do. And I'll explain points racing is that all of the other races, Booth Bay, right to Portland, because after Pemaquid, we got Long Island and Portland, and Long Island is just off Portland. The 10 races, you get points. Now, to qualify to race in the Maine Lobster Boat Racing Association is you have to enter, which is a $50 fee, which that gets you your meal at the awards banquet at the end of the year. So you do 3 races, that qualifies you, but you can only do a total of 5. And it's very, very difficult and it's very expensive to run to all of the races. And we understand that. So we try to limit it so that, somebody who's really trying to fish and make a living and not just out here playing can enjoy this and be competitive. And so last year we actually had, I think, 3 classes tie. So I had to give out 3 first places, which that's not a bad thing. All of these events are kind of interesting. Booth Bay, we race right down the middle of the harbor. It's kind of off to the west side of the harbor entrance. Rockland, we race right down the breakwater. So if you want to come and watch that race, you just stand on the breakwater. We do that on Father's Day. Bass Harbor is a little harder to see. You can see it from the ferry terminal that goes over to Swans Island, and you can see it from the Bernard side. There's a couple of places. There's a beach over there that you can actually see it a little bit. Moosabeck's one of the better ones because you can actually stand on the brand new bridge that they opened last year. And Stonington's probably a little harder to see. You can go out by Connery's where that's a lobster buying station, and that's almost on the end finish line. Friendship's a little harder. You can see it from the docks, but it's out away from the boat, so it's probably out a little bit, so it's a little hard to see. They do try to announce it. Harpswell, we were racing in Potts Harbor, which is right off of Dolphin Marina, but they're talking about moving it onto the other side where the terminal was for fueling Navy vessels. And I'm not sure that that's been approved yet by the U.S. Coast Guard. Winter Harbor, you can see it from the park. There's a place over there. I don't know exactly. It's on the northern side of the harbor. And then Pemaquid's another one that's real easy. You just go to the Pemaquid Fort, and we race right into the harbor, and it sucks right down into almost, room enough for maybe 3 boats to go through. And Long Island's hard because you can stand at the ferry terminal and look out, but we're probably off the dock by a quarter of a mile, maybe half a mile. And Portland's the same thing. You can see it from Munjoy Hill on the Eastern Promenade, but all of these, the best way to see it, and a lot of times it's easy to do this, is actually climb on a boat with somebody. Most of them are more than happy to take people out and show you what racing's all about. Sometimes I'd warn you to be careful about who you might go with, because sometimes the parties are a little extensive, but it's always interesting. We've also raced at Eastport. That used to be done with the pirate festival they did, and then the person that did it, he didn't want to do it anymore, and nobody would pick it up. We averaged only 12 boats. We never got a Canadian boat to come over and compete, which is too bad, but that's been gone for probably 10 years. North Haven was an exciting spot until we had a major accident there. And it was between what we call play boats, recreational boats, and go fast ones. And one of them went over a boat, and there was a girl that was knocked off the boat. And fortunately, she was fished out of the water because she had actually gone under. They had a diver there, and he went in and got her, and they airlifted her off. And fortunately, I don't think she suffered any residual effect from it. And Searsport we used to race in, and the Otises were doing that at the end of that tenure. And they were doing everything they possibly could. They were the day before Stonington, and unfortunately just couldn't get the turnout. And the reason for that is that Saturday is a day you can go hauling. And if you're making X amount of money, do you want to go spend money or do you want to make money? And sometimes, you know, making money in lobster, and as a lobster fisherman, you may have to go fishing, and we understand that. The rules and classes, basically the biggest rule that you have to understand is that it has to be a Maine lobster boat hull, and it can't be modified from the mold. Now, we do have some problems with that because we allowed Foolish Pleasure to modify her hull. If you look at her keel, it doesn't extend all the way back. It actually starts further down the hull than it should. And, you know, it's in a class what we call, basically, it's a play boat, it's a recreational boat, and it's there for a show. And most of the people who race understand that all this is a show. How we break the classes up is we break them up by the length of the boat and the engine horsepower. And I won't go into all of that because we've got, like I said, we've got 5 gasoline classes. It starts with 4 and 6 cylinder and goes up to unlimited. And then in the diesel classes, it starts at up to 235, and it goes unlimited. And it goes up to class O, which that's actually a recreational class. And the only one that actually races in that is a boat called Wild Wild West. How a race is run. It's pretty simple. We take all of the boats in a class, we get them down to a starting area. Now the course is about a mile long, and they put them in the starting area, and then you have a start boat. Now the start boat starts down the course slowly, and the boats that are in the race line up on each side of the start boat. Now they play games, and some of them are very, very good at it. The best one I ever remember was Wild Wild West, that used compressed air, that ran it down through the hull, through hull fitting, and put the air into around the propeller to get cavitation. As soon as the flag dropped, they stopped the air, and she had instant grab, so she got a good jump. And that was one of the best ones I had ever heard being done. But anyways, what you do is you start down the course, and when the start boat thinks that he's got everybody lined up perfectly, or as close to perfect as you can, they drop the flag, and you race about a mile. Now, some courses, Pemaquid is the shortest. It's probably 3/4 of a mile. And Winter Harbor might be the longest at just over a mile. But we try not to go too much, because these are boats that, for the most part, 98% of these boats fish. And we don't want anybody to blow an engine, you know, because this is how they make the money. So we try to be careful with that. We did have one start once in Friendship that was very, very interesting. It was started by the U.S. Coast Guard, and they got to the line and said, "On your mark, get set, go." And you've never heard more people scream as they were running up the course that wasn't a fair start. And it was easy to, you know, to figure out what had happened, and it was easy to fix it. And all I said is you just rerun it, and which they did. And we actually took the Coast Guard off the start boat, which was their boat, and we brought a lobster boat in with somebody on it. And I think it was Travis Otis on first team, as you can see here. And I'll explain that picture a little bit in a second. And he actually has done a lot of starts, so he knew how to start these boats and what speed you kind of need to go to, because the diesel boats, they like to be going 15 to 18 because they want that turbo open so that it doesn't lag when they hit the fuel. Well, this here is what happens sometimes in a lobster boat race. He's basically cooked the engine. That's why you see all that smoke. And he was able to actually get back to Searsport with the problem that he had, which took him, I think, an additional like 3 or 4 hours over the usual amount of time. So it probably took him 4 or 5 hours to get home. Now, some of the competitors over the years that are no longer racing, Corliss, Glenn, and Andrea Holland, we haven't seen for a number of years. Hopefully Glenn gets the boat back together at some point, which is Red Baron. She hasn't been really out on the race course since the early 2000s. Ernest Libby Jr., he used to race basically his lobster boat, but he's well noted for a boat that he built back in the 70s called the Marguerite G. And she was fast, and she won the title a number of years. And they tried to duplicate it a couple of times, but never really could, because when he built the boat, he burned the molds because she was a wooden boat. And it was too bad because she was a good boat. And unfortunately, that boat rotted and they burned her up a number of years ago. Calvin Beal Jr. has always been in the races. His most notable boat, and we'll see it in a little while, is called the Little Girl, which is now owned by Sean Alley of Beals Island. And what she's noted for is, besides being fast and have won a lot of titles, both in the wooden boat class and fastest lobster boat, is the time that she hit the bridge in Moosabec Reach, which was in 1981. The bad thing, Wayne Beal was holding his son, Jeremy, who was launched off the boat, went in the drink. He was a year plus, maybe a year and a half old. I wrote it up in the latest issue of Maine Coastal News because I interviewed Calvin about what life was like on Beals Island in the 40s and 50s, which really wasn't good either. Well, Calvin jumped over, and fortunately, somebody had said, there's something right there. And when he opened his eyes underwater, he was right next to Jeremy, who was sinking at the time. Well, I asked Calvin one time in his boat shop, well, what happened to the baby? And he turned around and he said, well, you can turn around and ask the guy yourself, because it was Jeremy Beal that was standing behind me. Jeremy runs Wayne Beal's boat shop now and is doing an excellent job there. So fortunately, we didn't have a real mishap. We've hit the bridge a couple of other times. I think mostly the last one I remember was a recreational boat that hit it sideways, and the guy got launched out of that boat and into the water, but he was out of that water so fast I don't think he was wet. And then the Young brothers, most people would remember Arvid and Arvin. They raced what was called the Camel, and they had a good war between Glenn Holland and Corliss Holland in the Red Baron. So you had the Sopwith Camel and the Red Baron racing. Another big racer that unfortunately we lost 2 or 3 years ago was Andy Gove. Andy had Uncle's UFO, which was a Northern Bay 36 with a 900 horsepower Mac, set the record in just over 50 miles an hour. He had won a number of titles over the year. And before that, his boat was called Love Boat. That was a Duffy 35, I believe, that he raced. Alan Johnson raced. He owned AJ Enterprises in Winter Harbor and still does. I think it's for sale. Alan, unfortunately, is losing his memory. And he had the AJ 28, which was the boat that you saw in the rollover. That was the one to the left that was still upside right. And that boat has proven itself pretty fast. Wes Lash, who we lost a number of years ago, and unfortunately, he was a wealth of knowledge in friendship. He knew all the history of the friendship boats and boat builders and stuff. And, you know, you always think you have years and years of time with some of these people, and before you know it, they're gone. And he raced a boat called Sea Fleet. And unfortunately, it's still sitting in the yard, and I'm sure it's got some issues by now. It's a wooden boat. She never competed very well, but you know, he was always there and had a good time. Keith and Travis Otis, I've mentioned. Keith, this boat here, first team, is a Northern Bay 36 with a 420 horsepower Sisu engine in her. Another name from the old days that hasn't raced for a number of years is Billy Hallinan, who had Apparition 2. She was a Young Brothers 38 with an 871 in her. She competed a number of years. And finally, the engine was getting a little tired, and Bill decided that, you know, he'd rather make money fishing than be, you know, because at one race in Searsport, he blew something up, whether it was the tranny or it was the engine. But he had to wait like a week or two for parts. And here it is, the best part of the season, and you don't want to be waiting for parts to get out fishing. Chuck and Richard Williams, they both come from Vinyl Haven. We haven't seen, well, Richard's been out, who is better known as Guica. He was out probably 2 years ago, came to Rockland and raced. And then I think he came over to Stonington and competed too. But neither of them have been out like they used to in the 90s and early 2000s. Jeff Eaton, he used to run the races in Stonington. He still competes. He has the La Bella Vita, and that's a Northern Bay 38 with a FPT engine in it. I believe it's 900 horsepower. It could be pushing more. And he did a very good job running those races in Stonington. His boat's competitive. He's been trying to get up to where Blue Eyed Girl is, which is another Northern Bay 38. And then we had Sid Eaton. Well, Sid, there's a lot of great stories about Sid. And I asked him once if I could interview him. And he said, yeah, you won't have to embellish a thing. Sid competed out of Stonington with a boat called Little Jan. And then he had Terminator. And I remember the first time he raced Terminator in Booth's Bay, he actually turned her on her side. And if Sid's scared, everybody should be scared, because not much scares Sid Eaton. But he was always fun to be at the races. And one of the best things I ever saw happen, he and the Hollands, they were racing in Pemaquid, and the Hollands lost to him. And all of a sudden, Corliss took off after Sid's boat, which at the time was the Little Jan. And Glenn Crawford was climbing around the boat, and you could see that he went down inside the cabin. And we had a good idea what he was doing. He was disconnecting the nitrous oxide, which was illegal to run. And they chased around the harbor probably 3 or 4 laps. And anyways, I asked Sid later about that. I said, how did they know? He says, well, they should have known. He said, they gave me the bottle. So, which was pretty good. Anyway, some of the old notable boats, Christopher, which was a boat built by Isaac Beale and his father. It was the last boat. She won a number of titles in the gasoline classes in the 90s. Daydreamer, which had both a big gas engine in it and a big diesel engine in it. And she won a number of titles. Of course, we mentioned the Red Baron. We mentioned Sea Flea. One of the ones that was always well remembered was Silver Dollar. It's a Willis Beale 38. There was other Willis Beale 38s that raced, Melanie Jean being the one that comes to mind a lot. That was when Thurman Alley raced it out of Beale's. And Silver Dollar was owned by Merle Beale, and she would compete. She wasn't really fast. He only had, I think, a 455 in it, or a 454. And but she was always there in Winter Harbor and Jonesport racing. And now she's being rebuilt over on Islesboro by Randy Durkee. The Stop with Camel I meant, Stellar Ann. That was a boat that was brought out by Benny Beale. Benny's from Jonesport, and this is a small boat, very small boat, about 28 feet. We used to call it an old town canoe. That was her nickname. And she had a big Chevy engine that was built by, the guy in Steuben, Richard Weaver. And that engine could put out a lot of horsepower. He was a drag racer, had built a lot of drag boat motors, dragster engines. And that boat has been donated along with a number of the trophies to the Beals Island Historical Society. So if you ever want to see it, and the Beals Island Historical Society is open, she's inside the barn there. Terminator, I mentioned. Voop. Voop was one of the first boats. I first appeared on the scene in 1988, and I haven't missed many races since that time. And Voop was owned by Louis Stewart of Cundy's Harbor. And it was a chopped up Duffy. It didn't have much of a keel. The rudder was hung over the stern as a spade rudder. It had no windows in the house. And it was set up as a center console. So a number of rules were broken, but it was fun to watch her. She was fast. I'm not sure she was as fast as they claimed she was. Somebody said she would do over 70, but we never saw 70. And she's back. One of the Saxton boys, Jeremy Saxton, I think is his name, he's got it. He's from Harpswell, and he's starting to campaign it again. And he came out for the last 2 races of the year at Long Island and Portland last year. So he may be repowered this summer and give us a better show in the gas classes. As I mentioned, Uncle's UFO. Another one that competed that has a funny story to it was What's Left. What's Left was owned by Richard Hildings from Vinyl Haven. And there's an actual song about him and the boat because his wife cleaned him out because he had actually talked to some tourist that really wasn't a tourist that came out to Vinyl Haven and told him all the woes of his life and what he had done and where he hid kind of his money. Well, they worked for the lawyer for his ex-wife or soon to be ex-wife. So basically the boat was all that was left after the judge got done because they actually showed the video in court. So, and then Whistling Dixie, Andy Johnson from Harpswell. That's a Holland 40. It's one of the first Holland 40. I think it's the second hull, I think. And she was very, very competitive for a number of years, but unfortunately the engine's a little tired. So he doesn't want to push it that much, which, you know, because an engine like that, I believe he's got a C18 cat in that. And that you're talking $135,000 to $150,000 engine. So you don't want to blow them things up, you know, often anyways. Now, the gas classes, I'll show you some pictures. We'll go to Cindy Jan. Cindy Jan is my boat. And this is how you race. You find a class that has nobody else in it, and you're guaranteed to win. That's my wife at the helm. This is a boat that was built in 1964 by Clinton Beale. It's what the old boats would have looked like. This was built originally for Phil Alley out on Isle of Ho and was named Geraldine and Bernadette. The second name was Cindy Jen when she was owned by Reggie Alley of Jonesport. And so this is the typical Beale's Island boat. This is actually the first boat Willis Beale worked on when he went to work for Clinton Beale. He also told me that the next boat was better because they added 6 inches to her. The next boat is Wide Open. This is a Rich boat. This is one of the oldest boats on the circuit that's still out there racing. This is owned by Wayne Rich, who we know as Cooley, and it was built by Robert Rich in 1953 or 54. So it's 68 years old. And it's got a small Chevy in it, but does very well. It's running usually around 32, 33 miles an hour, and usually will dominate its class and sometimes the wooden boat class, depending if little girl's out there and does all the races that it should. And then we have Black Diamond. This is a Holland 32. And I think last year I don't think she went to all of the races. I think Randy's other boat, this is owned by his daughter, Lindsay. But Randy's other boat is Audrey May. And I think we actually got a picture of her coming up. And she went to all the races last year. But usually Lindsay brings this boat to all the races too. And that's the one that dominates gasoline class C. Now we got Little Girl, I believe. Yep. This was built in 1981 to the design of Calvin Beale Jr. She is also the Wayne Beale 28 mold with a little changes. Wayne changed a little bit on the boat, not much. And it's been molded by a couple other people too. But a fast boat. And it does very, very well. And supposedly it's getting a major engine overhaul. And I'll say more about that later. I don't think we have a picture of Foolish Pleasure. But we might have, yeah, this is Down East Nightmare. This used to be, I think it was originally called Down East Nightmare. And it was Jeremy Beale's boat that he powered up with a gas engine that was pretty, it was used in mud runs and had a lot of horsepower, but he could never harness it well enough. Had he worked on it a little more, he probably could have got it. But time is usually always a problem with boat builders and racing. Now we go to High Voltage. This is an AJ28, and the guy used to work in the electrical business. That's why it's called High Voltage. And she does very well in gasoline, in diesel class C. And the next one is Audrey May, which is that Holland 32 that went to all of the races last year. And he does well in the class, but doesn't get by. There's a couple of them that will get by him. And basically it's high voltage. And then we've got Aiden Mariner. Now this boat has been sold, as I understand, and there's a new boat coming. This is Winford Alley's boat from Beals Island. And he dominated, which is called Diesel Class F. And so I haven't seen the new boat. It's over in a shop in Addison. And I'm supposed to stop there next month when I go down. So it'll be interesting to see what class he ends up in. And then we've got Right Stuff. And this is Dana Beal from Beals Island. In fact, he's the grandson of the boat builder that built my boat, which is Clinton Beal. And he was running a Clinton boat for a while. And then I think he went to a Libby boat. And I think this is the Libby boat that he went to, the 34. And he's dominated Class G for a number of years, but he's building a new boat. So, and I don't know what class those boats are going to be in. Now, Maria's Nightmare's next. This boat was doing 50 miles an hour at the end of the season. And the war was between he and Blue Eyed Girl, which we'll see a photograph in a minute. But he's basically taken this engine out and he's going to put in an Azada with 1,300 horsepower in it. And so that's going to be interesting to see where he ends up and how fast he can go with that. Now, the next boat is Gold Digger. This is Heather Thompson from Harrington. This is a Wayne Beal 36. I believe it is hull number 100. And she has made a name for herself up and down the coast because she's a real fisherman, comes from a whole family of fishermen. I think she's 4th or 5th generation. And the boat's called Gold Digger. And early this last summer, I got called from New York from Spectrum News. And they says, can we go out and cover the races? And we want to cover Heather. And so I hooked them up with Heather and they spent 3 or 4 days fishing with her. And then they came to a couple of races and they actually had it online. I don't know how you find it, but I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere. And then we go to Blue Eyed Girl. This is a Northern Bay 38 with a 900 horsepower FPT engine in it. And he does just over 50 miles an hour, 50, 52, and is very, very competitive boat. Sails very well. And he fishes that, all the time. So he's one of the staunch fishermen. Then we got Kimberly Ann, one of the pretty boats. This is a Calvin Beal 42. What they did is they took the 38 and they cut her in the middle and added 4 feet. You cannot add to the stern of these boats because it's almost like adding trim tabs in the down position, so the bow buries. And this boat actually goes really, really well. This boat has dominated this class for about 4 or 5 years. This is not Aaron Beal, Eric Beal. And he's raced this thing and had tremendous success with her. And I suspect he'll be out again. It's one of the prettiest boats. It's always very photogenic. Then we got Alexa Rose. And last year, he and Kimberly Ann split the title because they both had 5 wins. So this is a Northern Bay 38 with an FPT around 900 horsepower, I presume. And he did very, very well. And it's hard when you think you're going to go in all of these races. So you're going from, say your home port is in Searsport. So you're going to go, your first race is Booth Bay. The next day you're in Rockland. Then the next weekend you go to Bass Harbor. The next weekend after that, you go to Jonesport. The weekend after that, you go to Stonington. The weekend after that, you get my drift, is that, you're putting a lot of miles on the coast. And it's fun miles. I mean, I enjoy doing it, but it takes a lot of time and it's good dedication. Now, the big one, this is Wild Wild West. This is the boat to be. This is a 28. We're not really sure whose hull it is. It's either an old Hinckley hull or it's an old Stanley, Lyford Stanley boat. We're not sure. It was actually picked up on the end of the island by James West of Sorrento, and he made a mold. And this boat is, I'm not sure, this boat's from the 90s. And this is a 28 footer with 1,000 horsepower Isotta in it. Now, this boat's driven by Cam Crawford, which is Glenn Crawford's son. Glenn went out and bought 10 of these Isotta engines, but he bought bigger ones. They're 1,300. And he sold them to other people so he could have more competition. Because basically he holds the record for diesel class right now at just over 60 miles an hour. And he could break at any time. The rumor is that he could be up, around 65 to 68 miles an hour. We're not sure. But we do know he goes faster, but nobody's talking about just how fast he can go. So this year, when we look at how the season's going to go, you've got those 10 Isotta engines sitting out there that are going to go into some boats. I know one's going into Jeremy Beal's Maria's Nightmare too. And where the other 9 are, and if they're coming racing, we know that there's a Libby 34 being repowered with one. We know that Chip Johnson down in Harpswell's got one. What they're going to do, we don't know. It's always, the rumor mill has been going pretty good all winter. But until the first few races, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. Wayne Beal 36, they're making one with a hard chine, going to Vinyl Haven. We may see that one. Then, as we said a little before, Little Girl, she's getting big power. Well, that's because somebody has been texting him from Booth Bay Harbor and saying that they're going to beat him. Now, they own Thunderbolt, and that's the Ingrats. So it's going to be interesting to see if they get their boat together and get it out on the race course, and whether Sean gets his boat together, who just has the fastest boat. And a lot of people will come to see that race because that will definitely be in the high 50s, if not 60 miles an hour, speed going up the course. The problem with Little Girl is she's a wooden boat, and you race those poor things hard and you can run into some problems. So when we look at this at the season, it looks like we're going to have another good season. We're going to have some new boats. We're going to have some boats that have been repowered, and we get the old ones. And another reason that people do this is the camaraderie. They like going to different ports, talking to the other fishermen, seeing what they do, and having a good time. Booth Bay is one of the best places to go. They all line up at Brown's Wharf, and they party the first night, it's not like it used to be. It's more mild-mannered, and they all rent rooms there, and they basically sit on the dock and, tell stories about the winter and old days or whatever. So it's usually a good time by all. And I've had a good time over the years that I've done it. I've scored since 1999. So I've documented most of the lobster boat races. Every year I shoot around 4,000 to 5,000 photographs of these lobster boats going up and down the course, and try to keep track of these boats as well as I can. But there's an awful lot of them, and there's a lot of things they do that they don't want me to know because I'm the president. So, I have the say if they're actually cheating. The best thing that happened at an awards banquet, which we do at the end of every year, the awards banquet, one year somebody stood up and says, "We're all here because we cheated," and they all cheered. So you can kind of guess what some of them do, and some of them just cheered anyways. But anyways, I told you that I'd give you the wrap up of, where we're going to be and on what day. And so I said that we're going to start in Booth Bay Harbor on the 18th, and we're going to go to Rockland on the 19th, Bass Harbor on the 26th of June. In July, we're at Moosabec Reach on the 2nd. We're at Stonington on the 10th. We're at Friendship on the 17th. We're at Harpswell on the 24th. You can see we don't have very many weekends off. You know where my summer spent. August, is we're going to go to Winter Harbor on the 13th. Then we go to the Merit Bracket Lobster Boat Races, which is what Pemaquid is called. Merit Bracket was an engine builder, and they honored him after he passed away by naming the race after him. And that's the 14th. Then we go to Long Island. And I forgot to mention, one of the most interesting boat builders and people that put things together is Stevie Johnson. And we'll show you what Stevie did with the last slide. And let's see, we've got Long Island on the 20th, and then we've got Portland on the 21st. And then in October on the 15th, we have our annual banquet at Robinson's Wharf, which is really a great place. They really cater to us. They have good food, and we don't cause too much trouble. Now, this is one of Stevie's boats. And Stevie always asks me, what class is he in? And I have to tell him, I says, you're in the class of your own. This boat got us on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Now, to get on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, usually you have to do something bad, or you have to do something really good. And, but it's very interesting. The boat was very, very stable. There was a lot of boats when he first ran this. He brought it over from Long Island to Booth's Bay. Didn't tell anybody outside of the circle what he was up to. And how do you class it? He's in the outboard class, but we let him race with the big boats too. And he didn't take a prize. He just was allowed to race because it's a show. And I have a photograph of him being chased by 240-footers, Whistling Dixie and Motivation. And I forgot to mention one of the other big racers is Tom Clemens, who unfortunately hasn't been racing for a couple of years because he sold Motivation. But Stevie right now has an engine, which is a gas turbine. It came out of an airplane. It's about 2,500 horsepower. And they're trying to figure out how to put it in a boat. And they have a Crowley 36, if I'm not, no, maybe a 33. It's Wild One, owned by Scott Woods on Long Island. And they're going to put this engine in it. And hopefully we're going to see it this summer. And fortunately, over the years, we've been really blessed that somebody hasn't done something really stupid and caused a big accident. Because I think if we actually have another big accident, the Coast Guard may say, that's enough for you people. But Stevie has had boats that were questionable, but he won't bring them unless they're safe. And I'm sure he'll do the same thing with the turbine. But it will be interesting to see just how fast he can get a boat going with that thing. And hopefully we'll see it in June. So that's your run up of what we've got coming up this year in 2022.
Thanks, John. We do have a couple of questions, and since you were just talking about speed, we can start there. When and how do you measure the speed that you record?
Okay, I have a radar gun, but normally at 5 of the races, there's a guy that comes up, and I've used him at those races, and that's Ron Barrett from Plum Island. He used to race offshore race boats that do 150 miles an hour, and he's got a very, very good radar gun. Mine's $1,000, $1,500. His is probably $10,000. So we use his gun. The problem is in lobster boat racing is that if they're at an angle, the results aren't going to be as accurate. They're going to be a little off, and I mean on the low side. So we try to get them, if we're running for a record, come right at us. And one time we told them that, and they did. They came literally right at us. And you hope they turn. We've never had a problem to this point, but that's what we do. We just, we run them up the course, and we try to get the speeds as best we can. And I've actually, if you call and say, okay, I want to know Wild Wild West speed, I can tell you his speed on any race that we actually got him clocked. So some people actually do that because they want to know what their competition's going to be like.
Wow, cool. Just a reminder for everybody in the audience, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type those in the chat box and we can get John to answer them for us. And so next question, why was it that diesel engines became so much more popular than gas engines?
Diesel engines can out-survive like gasoline engines. Gas engines are small, and a diesel engine is meant to work. Some of these guys run those engines, 15, 20,000 hours before they actually even rebuild them. If you do funny things like race them and then you run propane in them or whatever you're doing that you're not supposed to, then you can get into trouble. But for the most part, a diesel engine is built a lot stronger and will last a lot longer. So that's why they switched. Gas engines are fine, especially if you're inshore and doing, minimal amount of work and a minimal amount of running. But if you want to save and, getting out there and getting back and stuff like that, you go to a diesel engine. It's just going to last longer, but they're expensive. Gas engines are $5,000 to $10,000, and a diesel engine, you probably start at least probably 30 today.
Is there a website where we can follow results this season?
Yes, I will have them on my site, which is Maine's Coast. And and then I also do it on my Facebook page. So that night after a race, I actually post, and I only post boat stuff on my Facebook page. You won't find what I ate for the day. So
everyone needs to follow Jon Johansen, our friend Jon Johansen, on Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the last one, I did a lot of what's going on in the boat shops. That's what I do in the winter.
Cool.
And the big one that I had in the last one that I just posted last Sunday was Willis Beal building a model 63 inches long, and he builds it just like he builds a real wooden boat. It's gorgeous. And if you don't know that it's a wooden boat, if it's not real, it's hard to tell.
Okay, one more question.
Sure.
Okay, what's your favorite part about the races?
It's the people that's involved in it. It's a lot of work, and I created that. That's self-inflicted. But it's the people that are involved in it. Getting to know these guys, and and they have fun, and they do push the envelope. And sometimes I have to find out about it. We've had a couple of incidences where we've made people change classes. Some get real mad. One I can remember, we changed his class in Booth Bay. Marshall Farnham and I did. And we upped him, I think, 2 classes, and he still beat the field by 100 yards. And you're going, well, if you can beat him that bad, you might not be still in the right class. But he got mad enough so that he didn't come back. And there's been a few that I've actually called on the carpet about engine sizes and stuff, because I knew the engine size from the engine builders. And, they get mad about it and don't come back. But, we try to keep them within the rules, but it's hard because the only way to know today what that engine has is if you use a laptop. And I'm not getting involved in a laptop. I'm not touching those engines. They're very, very expensive. And what happens if something goes wrong? I'm not going to be liable. So we have to rely on their word.